This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Lynn Freeman, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. The past 9 months have been a rollercoaster of emotions and change for Ashburton parents Joe and Deane Taylor. Last year, their 13-year-old son Tom was diagnosed with stage 4 hodgkin's lymphoma. Jo has moved to Christchurch to be at Tom's side, while her husband Deane stays at home running the family farm. On a parenting slot this morning, we're focusing on the realities and practicalities of looking after a sick child, the effect it has on the family dynamics, and the sorts of things that can make this tough time a little easier to bear. Jo is in our Christchurch studio. Good morning, Jo.
Good morning, Lynn.
And Deane is on the line, I think, from home. Hi, Deane.
Oh, good morning, Lynn.
Jo, first of all, how's Tom? Introduce us to Tom and how is he doing?
Sure. Well, Tom was just a normal 13-year-old boy last year. He loved his sport. He played rugby, hockey, tennis, really anything going. He could run, he did cross-country. And we just noticed him slowing down and just not quite as fast or as active as he used to be. And then he started getting some chest infections, and we started to get concerned. We had a few trips to the doctors. No, look, don't worry about those lumps in his neck. He'll be fine. And they'll go down. He's a 13-year-old boy. And just they never went down, Lynn. And so we started on this journey when we got the final diagnosis. But Tom's just come through the chemotherapy. He finished just over a month ago. And he's now reintegrating back to school, and we're starting to be able to look forward again, which is fantastic.
You're very straightforward in the way, Jo, that you tell that story, but is there any lingering anger? You said that those lumps were essentially undiagnosed, and it wasn't deliberate, clearly, on the part of the medical practitioner. Nobody wants to let something like that go through, but
look,
on reflection, how do you feel about it?
Look, absolutely. I look back, and I think you always look at what you could do differently. And I don't think we could do anything differently. We, as I said, every month, I guess, when these glands hadn't gone down in his neck and he had finished his antibiotic treatment for a chest infection, I took him back to the doctor and, if they haven't gone down in a couple of months, come back. And it was only after he was actually playing in a tennis tournament in Dunedin, and we went to a fantastic after-hours surgery down there because there was a particular lump that had appeared just under his clavicle and his shoulder. And I thought, this is not good. And I knew then that we were on a different road. He actually thought, this doctor thought it was tuberculosis. And I thought my worst nightmare was that I would have to tell the school principal that Tom had tuberculosis and the nightmare that would then cause for him. However, I actually wish that had have been my worst case scenario. It became a lot worse when we got the actual diagnosis a few weeks later.
Deane, when you did get, sorry to interrupt, Jo, Deane, when you did get that, I think it was a late night phone call actually, that diagnosis, how do you approach talking to your child about this?
Look, the challenge there was, and it actually carried on all the way through, was that it was very inclusive, the discussions, and 13's an interesting age in lots of ways, I guess, that they're at that big time change of life, and they're asking lots of questions generally along the way. For Tom, right from scratch, we were inclusive. We sat down and said, this is what we've got to do, this is what we face. This is the time frame that we believe we're working in. What we didn't know, and there are lots of things we didn't know, was that we were on a crash course to beginning the process, I guess, beginning the treatment, but we didn't know exactly when that would be. We kind of wanted it yesterday, as parents, I guess. And for Tom, we had time, and it was tough. It was exceptionally tough, of course, to start with, and through the process too, of course, but. We worked through that with him, and we were honest up front, as the people that were the professionals in the business were as well, really. So, yeah.
I believe he'd actually Googled his symptoms and believed that he knew what was wrong with him before that official diagnosis came through. That's pretty confronting too, isn't it?
Look, absolutely, Lynn. That was something that came out just in a car trip a few months into treatment. We were talking about the process, and he said to me, look, Mum, I Googled it before you told me, I knew it was cancer. So that was really confronting. It really sort of set me back a little bit that, he'd taken so much on board so quickly, and he was already starting to, he'd already been processing it.
Extraordinary at 13, isn't it, to show that sort of maturity?
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing about getting a diagnosis like this, is that it suddenly thrusts them into a situation that nobody wants for their child, but they suddenly have to deal with things that even their closest friends and siblings to a certain extent can't understand, and they really need and have a lot of grit. And I think when you look at children that are undergoing this sort of treatment, they are just amazing. They are so inspirational. They really do just get on with it. They know that the pills that the nurse is bringing them, or the bags of chemotherapy that are about to be injected into their veins, aren't going to be pleasant, but they just, all right, get on with it. And that we had a laugh in hospital once. The nurse was bringing Tom more and more medication, and every time he'd just say thank you. And she said, "Tom, you don't have to say thank you. This is really going to be horrible." But it was just his way of dealing with it. It's like, right, I need it. It's going to get me better. Thank you, and we'll just get on with it. Thank you very much.
What about those after effects of chemotherapy? Because it can range. I think he's had issues with his eyesight. It can even, impact on fertility, and that's a hard conversation to have with a teenager.
Oh, look, that was a particularly hard conversation. Once we had the diagnosis, Lynn, it was quickly a matter of they wanted to get him started on chemotherapy really quickly. But the conversation around, well, he's 13, his fertility may be affected, and they talk about percentages of it still being possible that he'd be able to father children down the track. But we wanted to preserve his fertility as much as we possibly could, which meant having a conversation. And I was just saying, we had the outpatients area in Christchurch Hospital is brilliant, but it's busy and there's lots of children and lots of families. And the young resident doctor sort of asked Tom, Tom, so tell me, have you been having wet dreams? But you could have heard a pin drop in the place. And Tom sort of looked at me with these big eyes and just got on with it. We had the discussion that, yes, we all agreed that we wanted to try and preserve his fertility. So he did have a biopsy as part of one of his surgeries, and we took that conversation on board. And I think that's an important one that all children with this diagnosis need to have from probably around 9, 10 and onwards. It is possible to preserve that fertility with the technology they have these days.
Deane, you've got 4 other children too, quite an age span here, but we've concentrated obviously on your conversations with Tom, but also you need to involve the other children, and I assume that you had that same open approach to them as you had to Tom?
Absolutely. One of the benefits today, with one being the treatment and the technology and the cards in your pack, is also having the ability to communicate really well, no matter where we are in the world today. And I think that's absolutely important. So there was a lot of information. Time went slowly. This is a long-term job, you might call it. That we work away from day to day and from hour to hour. But at any stage we're communicable, and I think, where we're at today as opposed to where we might have been 20 or 30 years ago makes such a difference that, we're only a phone call away, and we could be, we can be Skyped, or we can visit when we're closer if we're lucky, and everyone's in a different situation in that regard. Some people are having to travel an awful lot further, some are having to stay back and work. There's all those sort of variables, but as far as the kids are concerned, it's not perfect. And to start with, you all want to be together as a single hub, but the reality is that, life is in the big picture has to carry on as well.
I imagine it's brought the family even closer together, has it?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't want to ever wish this on anyone, obviously, to make you realise what's important and prioritise, and some of the things you used to worry about or think were important pretty quickly drop off the radar. So, it's certainly been a real bond, I guess, for whatever reason,
Well, Joe, it's brought you together, even closer together emotionally, but of course physically you farm south of Ashburton, so you're spending time with Tom in Christchurch, and I think your 10-year-old has moved up to Christchurch with you. So the family's kind of split too, which is hard in times like this.
Oh, it has been. We took the decision pretty early on that once we worked out what Tom's treatment regime was going to be, that if we could, we wanted him to be able to get to school as much as possible, and he'd just been accepted for boarding at St Andrew's College in Christchurch. Obviously, he couldn't board because he has no ability to fight infections or anything. His immune status is completely zero most of the time. So living up here at least gave him an option to get to some school days, which was great. And so we then quickly made the decision that Kate would need to move as well, because for two reasons. She's a great foil for Tom. As a 10-year-old little girl, she just gnashes away and she makes him giggle. And if that's one thing that you look for when you're undergoing this sort of treatment or this part of your life, is those moments when you can just have a giggle and a laugh. And so that was really important. And also to enable Deane to come up to Christchurch, he wouldn't have been able to actually come up if Kate had still been at school and involved in the community in Ashburton. So she really had to come up here to give him the flexibility to A, stay at home, and B, get up here quickly or when he needed to as well, which has worked out really well. And so I think it's not just the child with the diagnosis that you need to think about, it is the wider family. And so it has had a huge impact on young Kate. She's had to be pulled out of her friends and dropped into a brand new school here. And they've been brilliant. They welcomed her with open arms, and we've been very fortunate in that regard. And it was about trying to look at what some of the positives were about that for Kate as well as for Tom. And that was things like she could get a scooter. We can't scooter to school where she is. She has to take the school bus. But here she can scooter down the road to school, and she can scooter to a tennis lesson, and she can scooter to an art lesson. So those are some of the positives that we've been able to say. This is part of this short time that we're going to be in Christchurch. Let's make the most of it for Kate as well as for Tom.
Well, you've both taken a lot of positives from this experience, which is really heartening. And Deane, I think one of the other things you've looked at is not being afraid to talk about what you need, because it often is the way that we're very resilient. That word comes through a lot, doesn't it? And self-sufficient, and we'll, force our way through the toughest of situations. But is this something that you've learned also, to, when people offer help, as they often will, to accept it?
Absolutely, and it's kind of interesting that because often you don't expect you're going to be the one that requires the help. I guess there's the glass half full attitude in life, and that's the way it should be. But when your time comes, for whatever reason it may be, accepting that, because we tend to try and do things ourselves, I guess, in the first instance, but people are so generous, and we had incredible numbers of situations like that where people would offer something, and sometimes they didn't know. And I know that when we've done it in the past, what can we do? What can be something that's practical, I guess. It might be meals dropped in, doing the garden or the lawns, or just having a yarn. And I had some down here, and I know Joe did too, phone calls or visits from people. And it was really good because it just got you back, and you talked about all sorts of things. It's about life and the normal things rather than becoming more and more fixated in just a small area, which most of the time we kind of had to be. But, I look back at that now, and some of those calls were just simple calls, just one that's spontaneous, and different ones that would ring once a week or whatever, and have a yarn, and that's critically important for our own well-being, because we've got to be strong and fit and stay strong and focus on what's important, but also sort of normalise what we need to do as well. So, both Joe and I are very conscious of how important that is.
And having visitors to come and spend time with Tom too, once he's up for it. I think some of his mates have come to hospital, and that's a big thing.
Oh, look, it is. It was, again, the best part was just seeing him do some normal things. They'd jump up on the bed with him and have a pizza and watch a movie. It was just really, really special in that regard. And his big brother was like that as well. He would come down he's in the Hawke's Bay, and he would come down as much as he could and do the same thing. They'd just do boy stuff together, and that's really important. And that was time that I could leave that hospital room as well, because you get into that little bubble of the room, and you tend to stay there. So it's nice to have that the diversion of mates just coming in and being able to take Tom away from where he is, even though he's physically still there. It's just a fantastic distraction.
And another thing for parents in this situation to think about is that you get the diagnosis, but even the treatment isn't the end. I mean, you're looking long term once you cope with the immediate shock of it all.
That's right, Lynn. And I think a lot of people don't realise that you get this wonderful remission, and that is absolutely what you're striving for the whole journey of treatment. But it's probably only half, or not even the whole. It's certainly not the whole journey. You've then got these complications of the actual treatment itself, and in Tom's case, he's got things like a stress fracture in one of his vertebrae that we're just dealing with, and so there's it does go on. It's a long-term recovery and rehabilitation, and that's it doesn't just end when you get that wonderful remission state, even though that's what everyone is going for. It's really just a lot longer than that. And the good thing about a childhood cancer is that they look after your child until they're sort of 23, 24 now. They have a fantastic late effects program, and so we know that Tom will be followed up, or that we have access if we have any concerns about Tom's health at all, that I have the late effects nurse now that I can text or call, and we'll be straight back into that system and getting Tom the treatment that he needs, which is fantastic. They've been amazing.
You are Tom's advocate in the hospital, Jo, of course, and I think you're an expert on medical terminology, which is a useful thing to have. But we talked before about how open you both have been with Tom about his condition. How have you found the medical professionals? Because back in the day, of course, people in white coats wouldn't talk to patients, and they certainly wouldn't talk to children. How have you found that side of it? Is Tom anxious, keen to know as much as possible about the treatment and prognosis and that sort of thing?
Yes, look, he is, Lynn. He does take it all in. He's a 13-year-old boy, so he's very much at the grunting stage, and they're not talking a whole lot anyway. So he left, I guess, questions to me. We would then talk about it quite a bit afterwards, and he had taken on board everything that the doctors were saying. But they would turn to Tom all the time. Tom, have you got any questions? And he, in that moment, he could never think of the questions that he wanted to ask. He had them, but we just needed to process it in a different way. So it's an interesting part of the journey, and I think as a parent, you need to not be scared to ask those questions. You are the one constant in your child's healthcare journey. You are the one that's by their side the whole time. Nurses, and to some extent the medical staff, come and go with different shifts and different people, and so quite often they'll turn to you and ask, so what does Tom have for pain relief for this, or and so questions that suddenly you're thrust right into the middle of the treatment regime as well. And I think it's really important to be prepared as much as you can and learn as much as you can about what's happening. And Tom was fully engaged with that as well. He knew it may not have been a conversation that he had with the doctors or nurses himself, but he and I, or he and with Deane, would also have that conversation afterwards, and he would ask those questions. So what's going to happen here? Or he did always want to know.
Deane, for Tom, I know he's had moments of frustration, understandably. Is he concerned that he won't be able to get back to what he was? Because Jo mentioned before he was sporty outdoor kid there in Ashburton, out, and then even integrating to school. It's a big thing after going through this kind of treatment. He won't want to be treated differently, but he's gone through so much. He will be more mature than he was before, but in other ways also he will have changed.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Being a sporting, and he was naturally sporting, I guess, so quite a bit of that came kind of easily, I guess you'd say, looking back. He performed well. He performed, near the top end of the spectrum in that regard. And now what he's having to learn is that he's having to start off, behind the eight ball a little bit, you might say, and having to work hard now over the next, for those, the comment generally is that, it'll take kind of 6 months to gradually rid the body of some of the chemicals and gradually build up his coordination, his fitness, all those things that you kind of took for granted, or he kind of took for granted, and we did too, to a degree. And so you're on the pack now, and it'll be interesting and challenging for him in the next while to be patient enough, I guess, to build that stamina, to build, his expectations again. But we're saying it's a really short period of time. He'll look back one day and say, gosh, that, like that was only 9 months. That's what we're, you come at it from that angle, I guess, and say, look, we've got to be patient. Let's work this year. This year's only a year, isn't it? We'll work through that process and gradually build up, and one day look back with a positive outcome further down the track. So that's how we treat it, I guess.
And Joe, for you, you're caregiver and parent, and they're related roles, but they're also different roles. To be Tom's parent, there are decisions that you have to make. Maybe you have to say no to him sometimes, even though the temptation might be to always say yes.
Oh, look, very much so, Lynn, and I think probably more so as you come out of treatment and start to reintegrate back into normal life. While you're in hospital, there's very little no, and as I said, probably Fortnite was his best friend during the treatment days in hospital. He could disappear into that world. He could giggle and laugh with his mates, and that was great. So almost unlimited screen time. And now as we come out of that, we're very much having to restrict and have limited screen time and put things away, and that's really difficult. And it's a very fine line between when he's being just a normal 13-year-old that just doesn't want to get off the couch, or is my little radar on my, saying, oh, actually, no, he's not feeling well. I need to leave him there. I don't need to sort of be the grumbly mum and get him off the couch. So I find myself constantly questioning every decision and every command now, and running it past that cancer filter. Is it because he's unwell, or is it because he's a 13-year-old boy? So hopefully that will get better as we get further down the track, but it's certainly a factor at the moment.
Deane, one of the few silver linings here, I guess, is that your family, while ripped apart for this amount of time, you are financially stable and you've been able to make this work. You've been able to adapt and to manage to accommodate Tom's illness. But I think you're aware of people who aren't in the situation to do this, and your heart must go out to them who can't make it work.
Oh, look, absolutely, Lynn. It was 2 weeks ago. I went to it was a dad's outdoor sort of pursuits event in Auckland, and there was a group of fathers. We all got together with all different stories. Absolutely everything that could be different and the same in some cases, was there. People with different stories, and some of the stories were horrendous. They were geographical difficulties, single parent scenarios. People without the, as you say, the financial choice, I guess, and there's just everything there, and it really, brought home to us just how difficult it must be, and even just simply from a jobs perspective, I'm self-employed, so there's a little bit more flexibility, obviously there, but guys and girls that are in a situation whereby they've got a job to keep down, they've got a certain number of sick days, obviously, they've got all sorts of aspects that are just it's surreal really when you hear some of those stories, and all these stories, and the length of time of treatments, and just everything really. So that's it's tough, but the support, being able to speak together, talk about our journeys, I guess, and the ability to communicate online or whatever it might be, informing sort of support groups and the likes. Is something that we can look really positively at today, and being transparent and being able to communicate is really important.
Joe, just to bring this to a conclusion, what advice can you give to parents who in the next few weeks or few months may find themselves in the same situation? Their child is diagnosed with a chronic illness. What advice can you give them?
I guess the things that I've learnt along the way is patience. You're going to spend a lot of time sitting. It might be sitting at home, it might be sitting in hospital, more than likely, and so you just need to be patient. When you are really sick, the doctors and nurses are right there, but if you're in there for a set treatment, you just need to be patient. They will get to you. Not to sweat the small stuff. It becomes completely irrelevant. If you can, you change around your life and your focus to just focus on getting that child as well as you can. And I think understanding that you can't control everything, a lot of control in the situation is taken out of your hands as a parent, and that's really quite difficult. But you can control how you respond to that. And I think being calm on the outside was one of the most important things that I could do for Tom. If I was calm, then he was calm too, and that was really important. I mean, some of the practical things, a soft blanket was his best friend to take wherever we went, and into hospital was fantastic. And distractions, something light and funny. You know, we watched the whole series of Modern Family and the Goldbergs. If you want funny series to watch with the kids, then watch those two. They just make you giggle. And a digital thermometer was probably my best friend as well. It just makes taking temperatures just so much easier. It's worth the investment. And yeah, that's certainly where those things I would recommend, Lynn.
Well, thoughts to you, our best wishes to you all, Joe, Deane Taylor, and also to Tom, if you're listening. A shout out to you, buddy. Thank you for sharing so much with us on 9 to Noon.